Here, you're not alone now.
All right, this is like my phone. I'll log into my computer.
You look like Ronnie with the fan on top.
You're reading a Tosfos this week, just FYI.
What?
For that comment, I'm gonna make you read a Tosfos.
Okay, you go for that.
I can show you my whole setup here.
Very cool.
This is not where I teach from.
Where is this?
It's an empty apartment next door.
How many empty apartments are you aware of in the neighborhood?
Shh. How do I do this? Okay, let's get into Gmail. The apartment directly next to us, the owners are saving it for either their own retirement or their kids. So for instance, their kids were in it because they're both doctors. And they were hearing news about COVID. They wanted to be away from like everyone.
Makes sense.
So now you're gonna see me in stereo in 2 seconds. Okay, so let's leave.
Okay. So did you actually get to go anywhere today in the wonderful storm? You're muted. You're muted.
Hello, good evening.
Yes. So,
Hi,
Olivia.
Shabbat Olivia.
So our front lawn, so we got together with friends there.
Right. When it wasn't like pouring.
Yeah, I got to daven. I got the Shachris was, I mean, it was hot, but it was
right.
Shachris was outside, it was nice, and then we were outside for Mincha Marav, and it was good.
Okay, so you guys haven't started inside yet, right?
No, the shul has. I have not.
Okay.
I prefer.
No, I understand. I'm just like curious as to what people are doing.
Yeah, people are going inside. I don't want to say.
Okay.
HR is still closed, right?
No, they actually had a minyan today also. That's why I was asking. I was curious. So they have two out. They had two outside and one inside. So I mean, I haven't gone to any of them. So have you gone, Livia?
No, I've not. But my husband doesn't want to go, and he feels that he davens better when he knows I'm davening in the other room as well. He feels that at least he's not alone. So I still.
Okay.
That's how we started. I felt I was alone, and then Miriam joined. I said, "Oh." That's, from the time we were in the garden, no one wanted to be alone.
I must have the wrong link. I was meant to get into the HIR Daf Yomi.
You are in the HIR Daf Yomi.
We're gonna do a little philosophy.
Like, I can't reconcile. It's like I'm having a brain.
Listen, you can come to the RJC. I can come to HIR. So one big happy Talmud.
It's the same Talmud?
Yeah.
You sure?
Yes.
You double checked? Okay. The Vilna Shas you guys use?
But yeah.
Okay, good to see you.
Shavua Tov, everyone.
Shavua Tov, Ellie.
trying to adjust the lighting. We'll see if it works. Okay. Everyone hear me?
Yes.
So far.
Good. Good to see a new face here. A new old face.
I was gonna say, hopefully not so new.
Not so new. Well, welcome. Welcome. The old faces are very welcome too. So I had a little bit of trouble this morning trying to remember which daf it was today. So I hope I did the right one.
Kaf Chaf Zayin.
Good. So we got up to the new parak, or someone started the new parak?
We got up to the, well, we read the Mishnah on Friday.
Okay, we'll read it again real quickly.
I think that's a good idea, yeah.
Okay, the new parak, parak mifanim,
We're ahead.
which is on daf kuf chavav amud bet. Kuf chavav. So it says the new parak, last parak, of course, dealt, which was last week really, with the issues of muktzah, many of the issues of muktzah. Of course, there are many more to come, and there were many in the past. And this parak continues, but has a little bit of a different angle. So it says the Mishnah, let's say you have guests on Shabbos, right? So you have guests we'll see, or you want to learn, you need to clear out some space for people to sit. And in the room where you want to clear out space, you have a storehouse. So you have boxes of tevin, or boxes of grain. So the question is, can you clear that out on Shabbos? So it says
In the old days when they used to be able to invite people over for Shabbat?
Exactly.
Okay,
It's a different time.
okay.
They had masks, of course, right? Mifanin afilo arba v'chamesh kupot shel tevin v'shel tfuah mipnei ha'orchim. You can clear out even 4 or 5 kupa, literally means a box. We'll see some definition of how big it is, but a big box space in order to have room for guests. Or if let's say, the air conditioning is not working in the shul or something, right? And they need to come to your house to have a shir, or more people show up than expected, and they need a place to be comfortable, you can clear out space for them. Avalo et ha'otzar. But you can't clear out a full storehouse, and we'll see in the Gemara today what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. Now we're not there yet for muksa. This is a question, Rashi explains, of tircha. The question here is not, can you move these things? Because we'll see in a second, they have to be things that are right to be used on Shabbat, so you can move them from the question of muktzah. But even so, is it appropriate on Shabbos when you're supposed to be resting to do this much effort? And the Mishnah is saying that you're allowed to do a certain amount of effort, 4 or 5 kupot worth of effort on Shabbat. The next point is, what are the things that you're allowed to clear out? And this is where we get to muktzah. Mifanim, it has to be something that you could use on Shabbos, right? Otherwise, it's not appropriate. And so, for example, you can clear out truma tahora. Remember, grain on Shabbos, you can't eat it probably because it's not cooked. But you can feed it to your animals for the most part. So, if it's truma tahora, you can do it. Now, this not necessarily the grain. This could be food that's truma tahora. We'll see in the Gemara who can eat it. Udemai, food that's demai. If you recall, demai is Demai is, is if you buy grain from someone and you're unsure if they took truma and maaser from it. So we said earlier, many times we said, that the assumption is that most people do take truma and maaser. But if it's not certain, or if it's from an amaretz, you have to take off truma and maaser again, midrabanan. It's a clear midrabanan, but it's not, midoraita, it would probably be safe to eat. But midrabanan, you have to take off truma and maaser, and we'll discuss again why you would be allowed to carry that if you can't eat it. Maaser rishon sh'nitla trumato. Maaser rishon, again, which is when a person has grain, they take off truma, then they take off maaser and give it to the Levi, and then the Levi has to take truma from that maaser and give it to the Kohen, and then it's suitable to eat. Maaser sheni v'hektish sheniftu. Maaser sheni and hektish, which you exchange them for money, and you're going to bring that money to Yerushalayim, and now you can eat the fruit once you put it on money. The haturmas hayavesh, and if it's a dried turmas, what does a turmas mean? It's some kind of root vegetable.
It's a bean.
A bean. Okay. Any kind of bean it says? Okay. No one has it yet. We'll come to it. We'll get to it. But it's
it's a lupine.
Okay, I don't know what that means exactly. Okay.
It's like a long thing, so.
Okay, a bean. If it's dry, it makes the machali izin, because the goats, and most people had goats, or they might have had goats, you can feed that to your goats, so therefore you're allowed to take that out on Shabbat. Again, you're taking these out because you want to use the space, but you're allowed to take it out on Shabbos. Avalo es hateva v'lo maser rishon shel nitrot trumato, not the opposite of all these things. If it's not ra'oi to be used, tevel means you didn't take off truma and maser rishon, which you didn't take truma, maser sheni v'hektar shelo niftu, which were not redeemed, lo et haluf, you can't take out luf, which Rashi says again is some kind of bean. So Rashi there he says min kitniot, which is not edible raw for animals or people. Lo et chardal, or mustard seed, which again is not edible. And Reb Shimon ben Gamliel is matir beluf and pnei machal orvim, because ravens, which I guess have different digestive systems, will eat these. And since some people kept pet ravens, and you'd be able to feed it to your pets, it would be mutar to move it on Shabbat. Finishes the Mishnah, chavilei kash, chavilei etzim, chavilei zradim. If you have bundles of straw or wood or roots, vines, sorry. Im hitkinan lemachal behema metaltlin otam. We'll see in the Gemara. Some animals can eat these things. Certainly the straw we know. We'll see which animals eat wood. But some animals can eat these things. So if your purpose is to use them for animal feed, then you can move them on Shabbat because they're not muksa. But if they're meant for firewood, then you can't, because obviously you can't build a fire on Shabbos, and therefore they would be muksa. So that's the Mishnah, which is a review from Friday's daf. Says the Gemara now, Hashta, I don't understand the language. You say you can clear out 4 or 5 kupot shel tevin. What do you mean? Hashta chamesh mifanim, if you can do 5, arba mibai, of course you can do 4. What do you mean 4 or 5? You can do 5, say. Says Rav Chisda, our Mishnah is actually telling you a very important halacha, which is that you can't clear out an entire warehouse. So all it means is arba mechamesh. If you have 5 stacks, let's say, of tevin, you can clear out 4 of them, but not all 5. And the reason for that is because we never want you to clear out the entire surface, because we're afraid that you're going to see that the floor is uneven, which it probably is underneath all these containers, and you're going to want to smooth it out, which is a problem of harisha, what's harisha in English? Flour. Thank you. On Shabbat, and so we never allow you to clear out the entire warehouse. You can do 4 if there are 5 there, and if there are more than 5, the chamesh me'otzar gadol. And if you have 20 in there, then you can take 5. So 5, according to Rav Chisda, is the limit. But the Mishnah is adding a second halacha, telling you that if there are only 5, you can't take all 5. You can only do 4 of the 5. But if there are 20 or 10 or whatever, you can take 5. It says, and then the next words in the Mishnah, where it says avolo eta otzar, that you can clear out 4 or 5, but not the whole otzar. Well, we already told you can't clear out the whole otzar. What that means to tell you is that you can't, if you've never, you have a storeroom and you've filled it up with grain and you've never taken anything out of it, even if your guests come on Shabbos, you can't start clearing it out. They made a gzera, you're not allowed to start. It's only if you've already started clearing things out of it, then you can continue on Shabbat. And that's because it's Rabbi Yehuda, it's not Xera, it's Rabbi Yehuda, the Itlei Muksa. Rabbi Yehuda holds that since this storehouse has no indication that you're going to use it before Shabbos, because you've never started using it, so even though it has tevin, which you can feed to your animal, but you didn't designate it to feed to your animal, and therefore it's Muksa, and you can't start. And Shmuel said, so that's Rav Chisda. Shmuel says our Mishnah means Arba v'chamesh keda'amri inshi. It doesn't really mean 4 out of 5, and 5 is the maximum. That's the way people talk, 4 or 5, but it's a way of saying a reasonable number. And iboy afilu tuva nami mifanim. The truth is that, says Shmuel, you can clear out more than 5. It's just saying you can do a lot, not 1 or 2. You can do a lot. Umay avalo et otzar. So then when the Mishnah finishes off by saying, or that segment, you can't clear out the whole otzar, it means this first rule, shelo yimar kulo. Now, the Bach takes out the words, but the reason is, Dilma atila shriye gumot, we're afraid you're going to fill up the holes, you're going to smooth out the earth because you're clearing out the bottom. So you're not allowed, you are not allowed to completely remove the otzar, but what you are allowed to do is what we said you couldn't do according to the first opinion, which is aval, atchuli matchil, you can start off an otzar, meaning even if you've never used it before, you can open it up and take things out for the first time on Shabbos, and that's money Reb Shimon he, the letle muksa. That's Reb Shimon who holds that even though you've never used this before, and therefore you might, it is muksa, it's designated, you are not allowed, you are allowed to do it on Shabbat. Tanu Rabbanan, now continues the Gemara with the Braita, which clarifies our Mishnah. Ein matchilin bo'tzar tchila, which sounds a lot like the opinion we said of Chisda, who said in the name of Rabbi Yehuda. Right? You're not allowed to start out an Otzar on Shabbos. You're allowed to make a path. Let's say you want to get in and out. Let's say you want to get through the room. It's in front of your house. It's a way out of the house. You can make a path in the Otzar. Says Gemara, what do you mean? How can you not take things out but make a path? I don't understand. How can you got to move things to make a path? Says Gemara, well, what you could do is you can't pick things up and move them around, but as you're walking, you can kick aside the sacks of flour, the sacks of rice, whatever it is. So you can't physically pick them up, but you can actually push them aside with your feet as you're going. Now, this gets into a very complicated question as to why isn't that the same problem? And why, if you're moving your feet, is it so much easier? Rashi says, makes it sound like Rashi says it's derech halichato, that it's as you're walking. So you're not using your feet the way you would have used your hands and just using your feet, which is a concept we call, tilto with the shinoi, or tilto minatzad is a term we often use for that. Rashi makes it sound like you're really not doing anything. You could just sort of walk there, and shuffle your feet in a way that you move aside the grain so that you don't end up stepping on it, like you would be. This becomes a very important question in how you can move things that are muktzah.
Is this the first time we have in the Gemara that there's some concept of tircha? Or have we had this before? Or?
I don't recall if we've had it before in this. I mean, we have it many times. But
how do we know this? I mean, do we have a source or something? Or
so remember, we have talked about the pasuk of Laman Yanuach several times already, right? Which literally means you should rest. We're going to discuss in more detail, the parameters. But I mean, it's not, it's sort of derived from a pasuk. The pasuk says you should rest. It doesn't give very specific indications.
Right. Okay.
So your question is, what's the parameters? I think that's the chachamim more than anything. But we'll get into more details today. Not that it's going to clarify.
But they're using language like it's, legalistic language, asur, mutar, and stuff like that.
They did. They came up with certain limits. And so there's a machloket here. Is it 4 or 5? Is 5 a max?
Right.
Or is 5 a... It's true. It's a machloket amarayim. Continues the Gemara. Taner Rabba. Let's have another right. It's tzfura. Let's say you have grain that's tied together, right? So it's shrink wrapped, which means that you obviously put it aside for later, right? You took your grain, you tied it all up. Clearly, you're putting it aside for some future time. So says the Braita, Bisman she'itchil bo mi'erev Shabbat. If you started, you opened up the shrink wrap before Shabbos and you started feeding it to your animals, then obviously it's not muktzah, you're using it. Mutar l'stapek mimeno b'Shabbat, and then you could use it on Shabbos. But in lav, asur l'stapek mimeno b'Shabbat, divrei Rabbi Shimon. Now that's going to sound shocking to everybody, right? Because according to Shimon, you shouldn't have muktzah. So what continues the Braita, Rabbi Acha is matir. So we're klapi liar. It's the exact opposite. Or how can you say it that way? Ella, you're right. We should have said it the other way. Divrei Rabbi Acha, that you can't do it because he holds like Rabbi Yehuda that you have muktzah, and Rabbi Shimon is matir. Okay, so this Braita clearly needs to be switched around. So that's again the same machloket that we quoted earlier as to whether if you have grain that has clearly not been started to be used for feed, can you use it? And that's the machloket, the famous and long-standing machloket of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Tana, now a Braita asked, Kama shir tfu'at tzfura. What is, when we say something has to be tfu'ah that's tzfura, what does that mean? If you take 5 pieces of grain and tie them together, is that you're putting it away for the future? Clearly not. You have to have a reasonable amount, and the reasonable amount, says the Braita, is a letech. Letech is half a quart, right? So it's a very large amount. I actually think it's 24 sa'ah. I don't remember how. That's a lot, right? So a very large amount. And so if you have less than that, then everybody agrees, even Rabbi Yehuda, that because it's 16 sa'ah, right? 16 sa'ah, she says, sorry, not 24. So if it's less than that, then you can use it on Shabbat. Bamir of the Chumi Bar Zachariah Abayin, or the Chumi Bar Zachariah asked the same question to Abaya. Shir tfu'at tzfura bekama, again, the meaning of tfu'at tzfura is that it's wrapped together in a way that it's meant to be, the long standing, and you're not using it right away. How much is that? Amarle, Hare Amru Shir tfu'at tzfura b'letech. He heard the same thing we just quoted, that it's a letech. But if you have less than that, If it's a small container of grain, then even according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's not considered to be set aside and muktzah. Now, ask the Gemara the next question. Ibad, when we say arba v'chamesh kupot tikam, right? If you say 4 or 5 kupot, now again, this has to be, Rashi says, maybe I should say it, someone says it, that this is not going according to Abaya, because Abaya, remember, said that 4 or 5 is not literal, and you could have 10 or 20. But according to Rav Chisda, first opinion, that 4 or 5 was literal, and you could literally only take. Ask the Gemara, when we say you could only take 5, is it Hani Arba v'chamesh Tika Amar? Is that Hani Arba v'chamesh Kupot Tika Amar? Is that Arba v'chamesh Kupot in Tvei Lo? You're saying 4 or 5, not more, and that is Almalam Ute Bihilucha Adif. Is that because we don't want you making too many trips back and forth, right? It's effort, so you're moving, right? Picking up a box and going to the wherever you're going to put it in the shed. We don't want you to go back and forth too many times. Or Odilma Limute Masui Adif is the reason that we don't want you doing too much work physically and carrying too much. And so if you can't carry it in 5 trips, it's too much to carry. The difference, of course, would be, as Rashi explains, let's say you talk about carrying something very small, right? You have something very delicate. You're going to get glasses, right? So you only have 2 or 3 in a box. So if the issue is trips, you can only make 5 trips. But if the issue is weight, essentially, then you could presumably do many more because each box weighs very little. So let's try to prove it from our Mishnah, from a Braita. Tashma, well, we can prove from the fact that there's Tani Chada, there's one Braita, which is in fact the words of our Mishnah, which says Mifanin afila arba v'chamesh kupot, but adds here, of course, shel kadei shaman v'shel kadei yain. You can do 4 or 5 kupot that are pitchers of oil or pitchers of wine. The Tanya Idach, there's another Braita which says you could do eser v'chamesh esrei. You could do 10 or 15. So it must be that there's a machloka between the 2 Braita. And my lav b'hakam ifli, the marsav mutei b'hulcha adif. The first Tana holds that you can only do 5 trips, no matter what. There's not more, even if it's light stuff. And marsav mutei b'masoy adif. The issue is carrying too much. But if it's something light, like kadei yain and kadei shemen, then you only take, which of course you can't stack too high or they're going to break, right? But you carry a little bit at a time. You can make more trips. No, you can't prove it from there. Tikuli alma could be mi'ute b'hilucha adif. The priority is not to make more trips, no matter how light it is. Umi saber, when it says in the Braita eser v'chamesh esrei that it's talking about kupot, it's not talking about 10 or 15 boxes. It's koi akadin kai. It's talking about 10 or 15 pitchers. And lo kasha, the mishtakli chad bekupa, the mishtakli tray, and the mishtakli tlata. It depends on how many pitchers you have in a box, right? Like, you have a box of wine. So your box of wine might have 6 bottles in the box. And then if you make 5 trips with 6 bottles, you get 30, right? Now they, I guess, didn't have bottles of wine like we do, but they either had 1, 2, or 3. So it could be 5, 10, or 15. And that's where the Braita makes sense. But in fact, you can only make 5 trips, not more than 5 trips. And says the Gemara, ukadekuri de harpanya, like the pitchers of harpanya that were, presumably they were stackable, or they were, you could put several in a container and they would be able to be carried together. Now, so the next question, of course, is, if we say it's about trips, right, does that mean, first of all, well, 2 questions. The first question is, when we say Hani Arba v'chamesh Tika Amar, is that regardless of how many people you need space for? Remember, you're moving these things entirely because you want to use the space where they're located. So it doesn't matter how many guests you came home from shul with, right? Is it afagad itle orchin tuva? Is it, no matter how many guests you have or how many space you need, 5 is the maximum? Maybe 5 is sort of the standard, but if you have double the guests or triple or whatever, you can make as much space as you need for that. And all the Mishnah is basically telling you is don't do more than you need to. And in Tim Salomar, if you're saying it really depends on the guests, so if you come home from shul with 10 people, you can clear out, 25 boxes or whatever, then is it one person, chad gavra mafni l'kulo? One person can clear them all out? Odoma gavra mafni nafshe. Which doesn't literally mean for themselves, but does each person have to contribute? Meaning, is our Mishnah saying you can clear out 5 per person, but we don't want you, again, the whole underlying issue here is tircha, and so we don't want one individual on Shabbos doing more than they have to do. And so perhaps it'll be, if you're allowed to. Now, of course, if you're not allowed to, then there's no question. But if you're allowed to clear out more than 5 for many people, then does it have to be done by different people? So Tashma, let's prove from a story. Amar Rabba, Amar Rebbe Chia, Pam Achat Halach Rebbe Lamakom Echad. It's a very vague story, right? Once upon a time, Rebbe went to one place, whatever that is, and Rebbe Chia was a student of Rebbe, of course, right? Makom Dachuk L'Talmidim. Rebbe came Erev Shabbos, and he's going to give a big share. There's big signs everywhere, right? Rebbe is coming to town, come for the Daf Yomi. But Rebbe looked inside the shul, and he's like, this is definitely not going to be big enough, right? There was not enough space. So Yatzel Sadeh, he started looking around the area, and Matzah Sadeh Mleya Omrim. He saw that there was a field that had been harvested that was full of barrels of, not barrels of, what do you call them? The Van Gogh thing, the haystacks, right? So he saw the things of hay that were tied together, Omrim, or bundles of hay that are tied together. V'imer Rebbe kol hasadeh kulo. Rebbe cleared away all those hay bundles from the field. He moved them to the side to make space for all the students. So you clearly see from the story that you can do more, of course, than just 5. You can do kol lefi ha'orchim, basically. Rav Yosef Amar Reb Hoshaya said there was another story about Rebbe's student. And as he learned from his teacher, he was Yatzel Sadeh, Matzah Sadeh Leya Omrim, V'imer Rebbe Chia Kol HaSadeh Kula. So you see from these stories, Shema Mina, Hakol Lefi HaOrchim, that if you need more space, you can clear out more things, because of course the implication of clearing out a whole field is that it's more than 5 bundles. It doesn't give a number, but many bundles. It says but still, even though we resolve that you can clear out more if you need more space, the question is it chad gavra mafne lekulo, domako gavra mafne nafshe? Does it mean one person can do all the work, or does each person have to do a certain amount of work? Again, not necessarily for themselves, but a certain amount of work. So Tashma says, well, let's prove it from the story. The story was that Imer Rebbe kol hasadeh kulo. It makes it sound like Rebbe did it himself. So clearly you can have one person do the whole thing. Since we're at one step. Of course, Rebbe didn't do it himself. L'tamech. Rebbe b'denafshe Imer. Who in the world thinks that Rebbe would be, the teacher would be doing the whole field? Ela tzivet v'imer. It means he told everyone to do it. He stood up and he instructed them to clear the field. And it could be the chol chad v'chad, but mifani l'nafshe, that each person does it for themselves. And so we don't resolve that second part of it. You can clearly clear more than 5 bundles if you have many people, but it's not clear if one person can do all that work. Continued the Mishnah that when can you do this on Shabbat? You can do it mipnei ha'orchim, for visitors, for guests. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, you see from here that gedolach nasat orchim ki hashkamat beit hamidrash, that greeting guests, nasat orchim, is as great as going to learn in the Beit HaMidrash. The Ketani, because our Mishnah said, Mipnei Orchim, Mipnei Bitul Beit HaMidrash. It sort of made equivalency of these two things. Rav Dimi said, Minarda, it's even more. Yoter Hashkamat Beit HaMidrash, because the order was, Ketani Bnei Orchim, and Hadar Mipnei Bitul Beit HaMidrash. So our Mishnah put Hachnasat Orchim first, even before learning. So you see that it's great, so great to have guests or Hachnasat Orchim. Amar Rav Marav. In fact, Gedolach, Hachnasat Orchim Mikabot Pnei Shechina. Hachnasat Orchim could sometimes, maybe, be even greater than talking to God, than accepting the Shechina. The Chtiv, it says by Avram, Vayomer Adonai is really the word, is the Hashem. Imna matzati chem einecha na tavar. Right? So basically, the understanding is that he was talking to Hashem, and he said to Hashem, pause a second, let me greet guests. Let me go in and greet these guests. Amar Rebbe Lazar, says Rebbe Lazar, look at how Hashem is not constrained by the same limits of basar v'dam. Midat basar v'dam, if you have normal, regular humans, you never have a person of lower stature say to someone greater than them, I'm supposed to come now, I'm taking care of something important, wait a second, I'll come later, right? That's exactly what happened. Let me, let's pause and let me go and accept and greet these guests. So you see how Hashem is not limited by the same rules, I would say, and he's greater than Basar V'Dam. While we're on the topic, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shila, Bar Shila, Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. There are shisha dvarim. There are 6 behaviors that Adam ochel perotem b'olam hazeh, a person that are righteous, right? That a person will eat the fruits, will get the benefit of them. B'olam hazeh, v'hakeren kayemet b'olam haba. But the principle of the mitzvah will last for that person in the world to come. Elohein, and the following 6 things: hachnasat orchim, greeting guests; bikur cholim, visiting the sick; iyun tefillah, which we had last week. We discussed, some iyun tefillah is sometimes thought of as a negative thing in brachot, but here it's a positive thing, and it means the one who pays attention to his kavanah and thinks a lot about his tefillah or her tefillah. That's the third. Hashkamat Beit HaMidrash, someone who wakes up and goes to the Beit HaMidrash, which interestingly, there's Mefarshim who say that similar to the next thing, it doesn't mean that he actually studies in the Beit HaMidrash. It means that he goes to open the Beit HaMidrash, clean it up, take care of it, because it's similar to the next one, which is Megadal Banav Talmud Torah, one who raises their children to learn Torah. Again, not necessarily learning themselves, but who supports Torah and supports the Beit HaMidrash. And the 6th one is Hadanet Chavero L'Kaf Zchut, a person who is done, his friend who judges another person favorably. If something happens, they see, there's ways to interpret a circumstance, they treat it as the most generous or the most zchut that you can of that circumstance. So that's 6 things, and we brought it here just because of Hachnasat Orchim and how great it is. But these are 6 things that are Ochel Perotem Olam Hazeh and Keren Kayemet L'Olam Haba. Ask for Eini Anantna. We have another Mishnah which says Elu Dvarim Shadam Osel Tam Ochel Perotem Olam Hazeh. These are things that a person can do. In Mishnah, we read at least some version of this Mishnah every morning, and you get Perotem Olam Hazeh. Perotem Olam Hazeh. Keren Kayemet L'Olam Haba. The Elohim, and the Mishnah that we have is Kibud Avim, right? First of all, Kibud Avim, Gmilut Chasadim, which is a pretty big catch-all, right? But being generous, doing acts of chesed. Ahavet Shalom Ben Adam Lechavero, bringing peace between one person and their friend. The Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. So then, and Talmud Torah, of course, is as great as everything. Excuse me one second.
In your face.
Hani in Midiachinilo, sorry, interlude. So these are the only things, not anything else. So the first Mishnah,
Sorry.
so the first brayta seems to imply there are 6 things, and this Mishnah has only 4, and they're different things. Says the Gemara, fascinating answer, Hani nami bahani shaykhi. These 2, meaning these other ones that we mentioned, they fall into the same category. So Rashi explains that the Mishnah, of course, is the primal source, but when we send it over differently, Rabbi Yochanan said 6 things. The 6 things all fall into the category of the Mishnah because what are the 6? So Hachnasat Orchim, Bikur Cholim are Gmilut Chasadim, right? You're doing kindness to other people. Iyun Tefillah, Rashi says, this is again very amazing. Rashi says Iyun Tefillah is also Gmilut Chasadim. Because when you're concentrating and focusing on your tefillah, you're doing a kindness to yourself to build your understanding and your connection. And so doing kindness to yourself is also gmilut chasadim, right? And that's what Rashi says. Others say, I forgot, I'm trying to remember who, someone in the back, or maybe the Marsha, says that in fact, iyun tefillah falls into the next category of haveit shalom ben adam lechavero, because by praying, you are focusing on your connection between you and Hashem, and you're able to bring peace and understanding and peace to that relationship. Okay, it's a very fascinating discussion to have. The next one is, where am I? Hashkamat Beit HaMidrash and Megadel Banav Talmud Torah, which fall into the category of Talmud Torah. And Danat Chavero L'Kaf Zchut is bringing peace. Right? If you judge someone favorably, obviously you have a much more peaceful relationship with them than if you're very suspicious of them and assume the worst in all their actions. So these are included in that other list. Of course, the Kibud Avim is sort of an addition from the Mishnah, which Rabbi Yochanan left out in his list for.
So what we say every morning, we put those 2 together or something like that?
Yeah, so we add in, there's other versions of this Mishnah, so Tosefta, that has a few more, and you'll see even in different Sidurim, there's different languages that are brought. I think that, I don't remember all the details, but sometimes it's a more expansive list than the Mishnah. The Mishnah itself, really only has those 4, but there's a Tosefta that adds, and there's other, we quote many more.
There's 10 in the Mishnah we cite in the morning.
Right. But
Yeah.
Someone might have more detail about this, but some of them are in parentheses in some Sidurim, and they're from different so. But either way.
Also, there's a piece that of doing a Gemara as opposed to just doing a Mishnah, meaning the full list that are in a lot of Sidurim is a quote out of a Gemara. So this way we learn both Chumash, Mishnah, and Gemara. We start with as those 3 things, so we've sort of like covered the entire universe.
Thank you. Continues the Gemara. Tan Rabbana. Hadan chavero lekaf zchut. If a person is done their friend or a person, another person for zchut, danin oto l'zchut. In fact, that person is rewarded by being done l'zchut. Now, it's a little bit of a strange Gemara. We'll see. It's a beautiful Agadita, which I think many people are very familiar with, but it doesn't really show us at the end of the Agadita how that person is done lekaf zchut. But it's just a statement of the Braita. What's the story? What's one of these stories? Ma'aseh ba'adam echad sheyarad migalil ha'elyon. There was a person who lived in the Galil ha'elyon, right? Up there. And he had no money. He was starving. He had no job. And he went down meaning from the Galil to the plains, right? And he looked for work. Then Niskar Eitza Balabayit Echad B'darom. He went, to the south, where I guess they were more prosperous. And he rented himself out to a landowner to work the land, to and get paid. Interestingly, everyone quotes here, the Gilead Hashas quotes it over here, that there's a Braita quoted in the Shiltod, which says that this person, there's a lot of different versions of this, but the version that the Shiltod quotes is that the Adam Echad was Akiva ben Yosef. It was Rabbi Akiva when he was a young man, I guess not Rabbi Akiva yet, and that the Baal Habayit was Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus, who, as you know, we quoted elsewhere that Horkinus was incredibly wealthy, and Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus was, the Baal Habayit, who in this story. So Rabbi Akiva goes down and he doesn't have any money, as we all know from the story in Ksubos, right? And so he has to find work. So he works for this guy, and he works for 3 years. Shalosh shanim, right? He works for 3 years, and then he's ready. I guess his work is up, or whatever, Erev Yom Kippur, which is the end of the harvest season. It's time for Rabbi Akiva to go home to his family. And so he says to Rabbi Eliezer, I'll use those names here, Omer lo tein li schari ve'elech ve'zonet ishti u'banai. It's time for me to go home and support my family, give my family, what to eat, as they say. Amar lo, so Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkin says to him, I'm really sorry, ein li ma'ot. I don't have any money. Remember, he's a multimillionaire, right? I don't have any money. Okay. Amar lo, so Rabbi Akiva says to him, or Akiva at this point, tein li perot, so pay me in food, right? I just harvested for you. I know your grain, your storehouses are full of grain and whatever. Give me perot. Amar lo, ein li, I have none available. So he said, tein li karka. Okay, so let me have the deed to some of the land. You have 100 acres or whatever, 1,000,000 acres. Let me some of your karka. Ein li, I don't have anything available to give you. Tein li behema. Let me borrow, get some of your tractors or your cows or whatever, all the animals I see. Ein li, I don't have any. Finally, Akiva says, tein li at least karim ksatot. Give me some beds. I know in the house you got some pillows and covers, something of value that I can bring home. Ein li, he says, I don't have anything. So he gave up. Hifshil kilav lachurav. He flung his sack on his back, and halach lebeito, and he went home to the Galil. Bepache nefesh, right? Well, bit unclear how he got home on Erev Yom Kippur, right? They didn't have hasaot back then, but either way, he went home to the Galil, depressed. He had nothing to bring to his family. La'achar rega, now after Sukkot was over and time had passed, then Eliezer ben Horkinus got the money, and Natal Balabayit, this Balabayit, who I'm naming, but our story doesn't have a name. The Balabayit took his scharo, biyado, v'imo masu shlosha chamorim, and he brought with him three donkeys full of goods. Echad shel ma'achal, one had food. Echad shel mishteh, one was full of drink. Echad shel minei megadim, one was full of candies, maybe whatever minei megadim were back then. V'halach lo lebeito, and he went to his house. He went to the Galil and brought this stuff that he owed him. Achar sha'achlu v'shatu, after they sat and ate and drank, natan lo scharo, he gave him his whole wages, and he asked him, Amar lo, b'shasha amruli, amarti li, when you said to me, tein li schari v'amarti ein li ma'ot, b'ma chashtatani, what did you think? Why did you think I wasn't giving you the money? Amarti, so Rabbi Akiva said, Shema prakmatya bezunas dam lecha. I thought maybe you got a really great opportunity, right? Some really cheap, the market for, I don't know, oil futures was really, really out of whack. And you lakachtabem, you used all your money to commit to buying something. Okay. Ubishasha amarti li, tenli behema, amarti enli behema. You know I have hundreds of animals. B'machashtatani, amarti shema muskeret, b'yad achirim. Maybe you rented, they're all rented out for other people, right? People pay you to use your animals, to use your tractor, and they're paying you back, but you couldn't just give one to me. They're all spoken for. So b'shash amarti li, tenli karka, amarti l'chayin karka, when I said no land, the same thing, right? Shema muchrachet b'yad achirim. Other people are working them, right? You've rented out your land for someone to work, and they pay you annually or whatever, but you don't have any available right then to give to me. You know, I have perot in my storehouses. Amarti shema ina musarot. Maybe you didn't take maaser on them yet, right? Of course, many people ask, you could ask many holes in the story, but why don't you just take maaser and pay me then, right? So some say, well, it's Erev Yom Kippur. Who's got time to do that either? But clearly, okay, maybe they're not musar. You know, you don't take maaser on your pillows, right? So what did you think then? So there, amarti, the final answer, which is the most, dachok answer, maybe you'd become an ascetic right then. You said, I'm giving all my millions to heaven. Amarle ha'avodah, he said back then, this again, according to the other Braito, it's Eliezer ben Horkenes, that's in fact kachaya. It's exactly what happened. Hadarti konech sai b'shir Horkenes b'nish l'asak b'torah. I was having a very bad parenting day. I had just gotten a report card or whatever from my son Horkenes, that he was not excelling in yeshiva. He was leaving. I don't know. He was not doing what I wanted him to do. And of course, my reaction was, this child is relying on my millions and not taking life seriously. I'm giving it all away, right? And so I said, I'm giving everything to the hektish, just on that day. Maybe it was Erev Yom Kippur. Maybe that was his day. And of course, when calmer heads prevailed, and I went to my chaverai b'darom, they told me obviously I was doing that in anger, in sudden moment, and they were matter me from the nether. So now I have all my possessions back. And you, just like you have dani l'schut, I give you a blessing that God should dani l'kav schut. We don't see where that happened, but we see that that's a bracha that's given in this context. In fact, another story, similar kind of story, Tan Rabbanan, Maaseh b'chasid echad. There was a righteous person. Again, we don't have a name. Of course, chasid often means Elio. We talk about, but either way, Maaseh b'chasid echad, shepada riva achat bat Yisrael. He redeemed. There was a young girl who was a captive, and obviously, which is tremendously dangerous, right, for purposes that young women would be used in captivity. And so he went and he redeemed her. And he brought her to his hotel, and she slept under his feet, which, we use that language by roots, of course, right? But it means, in his bed or next to him. The next morning, he woke up. First thing he did before he went to give the shir is he went to the mikveh. And then, Shana Talmidav. So obviously, then he taught his Talmidim. So there was, the sequence of events seems very suspicious. So Amar Lahem, so he said to his students, B'shash hishkivtia tachat margalotai machashtatuni. I was doing something inappropriate. Amarna, they said, no, Shema yishbanu talmid she'eino baduk, the Rebbe. Maybe you didn't want to leave her with the communal bed with the students because you don't know all of us yet. You don't trust all of us yet. So maybe you were doing it because you had to protect her. Not you didn't want to sleep with her, but you were protecting her from us. And why would I be going down to the mikvah? It implies that I slept with her, and therefore I had shechvat zera, right? And I am about carry. Carry the Rebbe. Maybe it's not because you slept with her; it's because you're not used to traveling, and all the stress of traveling caused you to see carry, and therefore you had to go to the mikvah. Amar them, he said to them, in fact, you are correct. Avodah kachi. I swear, avodah is often a promise they would make. This, in fact, would happen. Same thing. You should be blessed that God should judge you when you do actions that are uncertain. Tanra Banan, another.
Can I go back to the other story? Aren't you supposed to pay your workers like every week or something like that? I mean,
So it's a very good question.
you can't wait for years to pay your.
Well, so that detail I'm not so sure, because obviously it depends on whatever agreement you make.
Right, I mean, that's ridiculous.
And it's certainly possible, presumably, that Rabbi Akiva sent money home, right? His family was not starving this time.
Okay.
But, so it could be he had some wages that he got every week. And this is all possibilities. And he also was going to get something at the end that was owed, 10% or whatever.
Okay.
But the further question that, and many of the Mepharshim talk about this, is that, it's really much more complicated, of course, because even if your land is muskar to other people, right? The fact is, if you owe wages to someone, you have to take actions to sell your land, to get out of it. It's not like you can just say, I owe you $1 million, but sorry, I sold everything yesterday.
Right.
You have responsibility. So the Marsha says here that it all has to do with the Erev Yom Kippur part. That the issue here was not that he wasn't going to pay him, was that he had nothing liquid right now as you're getting your Sudam Afsekes ready, right, to do. And that's the reason we quote that part of the story. Or of course, Rabbi Akiva was being very generous, and he had a right to claim things that he was not taking. But these are agadata. I mean, I wouldn't read too much into
I understand, but still, the premise is a little odd, that's all. Okay.
I think the whole point is that it's telling you a far-fetched story to make the
Okay.
Anyways, continues the Braita. Tanar Banan pam achad utzrich davar echad mitalmidei chachamim eitzo matrunita achad shekol gdolei romim mutsuyin etzla. There was one time where they had to do some business with for the Talmidei Chachamim with one of the matronita, a madame we would call it, right? A woman who ran a house of ill repute, maybe, which was frequented by Kol Gedolei Romi. So therefore, obviously, a very valuable person to know. She might have secrets, she might have access, maybe she can intercede. So whatever the business was, don't say what it was. Maybe they had to redeem somebody, maybe they had to get a message or give a message, but they needed someone to go to this place and give this woman and talk to her. So Amru Mihilech, who's going to go? It was not apparently a job that anyone wanted to do. Amar Lam Rabbi Yeshua Ani Elech. Yeshua said, I'll go. Okay. I don't know who else was in the discussion. Rabbi Yeshua said, I'll go. So Halach Rabbi Yeshua v'Talmidav. Of course, Rabbi Yeshua can't go alone. He goes with his pack of students, and they get to the red light district, right? Kivan shegia lebeit petach beita. They get to the opening of her house, and this is the house where she engages in business, right? Chalatz tefilav richuk arba amot. He took off his tefillin 4 amot away from the house, which of course is a ominous sign, because most people, then at least, wore tefillin all day. You take them off if you were going to be engaging in intercourse, but why is Rebbe taking them? Why is Rabbi Yeshua taking them off? Anyways, he took them off. V'nichnas, he went into the house. V'na'al hadelet bifneihem. He locked the door behind them, which is very suspicious activity, of course, because that's yichud, right? He locked the door. Achar, and he sat and he chatted with this woman, or whatever time, an hour passed, 2 hours passed. Anyways, achar sheyatza, as soon as he leaves the house, before he goes back to teach his students, Yarad v'taval, and then Shanel Tamidav. He goes to the mikvah. Again, looking very suspicious, like maybe what happened in that house. Amar lahem, so he said to his students, Bisha shechalatzti tefillin b'ma chashtatuni. What did you think? Why, when I took off my tefillin, did you think I was going to be engaging in illicit behavior? They said, no. Amarna, we thought Kasavar Rabbi lo yichnasu divrei kedusha b'makom tuma. And even though, even if you weren't engaging in any activity, the place is a place of tuma, and so it's not appropriate for you to go in with tefillin. Okay. When I locked the door, what did you think? Why was I locking the door? I don't know. We don't know what you're talking about, but maybe it's highly sensitive, secret information, and you can't have anybody have access. So you have to do it privately. When I went to the mikvah, why would I be going to the mikvah in the middle of the day? If I didn't do anything. Amarna, we thought, no, you didn't sleep with her. Shema nitzat sinura mipia begadav shel Rabbi. Maybe she spit a little bit when you were talking, and there is a gzeira that the spit of a non-Jew is treated like ziva, and therefore you had to go to the mikvah. Amar lehem havodah kachaya. In fact, this is exactly what happened. Atem kashem shedantuni the schut hamakom yedin etchem the schut. In the same way, you judge me the schut, Hashem should judge you the schut. So this is the end of the story. And that's the end of our Agadata. The same question here. What about yichud, right? I mean, this is the highlight of yichud. If you lock a door and no one can come in, you don't have any of the heterim of ishto b'ir So I'm sure many people discuss it. I didn't see all of them. Some say that maybe she had other people in the room with her, which does not seem to be something that would help the situation very much. Some say it was before they made a gzera, because if you call yichud on a non-Jew, it's just a gzera that was made, as we said in Avodah Zarah, we'll get back to. So maybe it was before the gzera of yichud. Maybe when you have very important governmental business, they didn't make a gzera of yichud because you're being osek in the business and therefore you're not likely to do something inappropriate. So you could see why, if you take the story literally, it has pretty significant implications. You could also just say it's an agarita, but I'll leave that to the yichud questions. Should we have time to do a little bit more? A little bit more? No? Yes? Okay.
Yeah.
A few more minutes. Well, we have, because, so back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, what can you clear out? You can be mefanin truma tahora, truma that's tahor, somewhere pshita. Of course you can, right? You can, that's normal edible stuff. We're talking about a case where it's in the house of a Ben Yisrael. So the Ben Yisrael can't eat it or give it to his family, of course. But Asur, since he personally can't do it, use it. It's Asur, Kamash Malan, keeping the Chazi the Kohen, shop your dummy. Fact is that, he lives in a neighborhood, and the Kohen could come by, something that can be used by a Kohen. This gets into a very complicated question, which I'm not getting into too much, which is how available does it have to be? Does it have to be that you know a Kohen? There's a lot of Kohanim. There's one Kohen in North Riverdale, right? So and this is an important halachic question as to, to what extent are you allowed to do this? I'm going to leave it aside because it's complex. Udemai, the Mishnah said that you can take out demai. Remember, demai is tefua that you bought from Amaretz, and midrabanan, you have to take off truma and maaser before you can eat it. So demai halo chazila, you can't eat it, right? And I remember you're not allowed to take truma and maaser on your Shabbos. If you want to, or if you need to, you can make everything hefker, and you can become poor. You can give away all your possessions, right? Like make yourself ownerless or penniless, and then you're an ani. And remember, chazile, then you can eat demai, right? And hashanami chazile, and therefore, even though you're not doing that, since you could do that, it is potentially suitable for you, and it's not, as we learned in the Mishnah and demai, the machilinata aniyim demai, atachsanya demai. You can feed demai to poor people. You can feed demai to achsanya means like troops, right? So if people come through town and they're troops and you have a responsibility from the government to feed them, you can give them demai. It's like aniyim. Anyways, as we learned that there's no gezerah, the takana of demai was not made in the case of aniyim. Rav Huna said, Tana, we learned in the Bright, in fact, it's machlokat, that Beit Shammai omrim ein machilin et aniyim demai v'tachsayin demai. Beit Shammai says you can't do it, but Beit Hillel says machilin et aniyim demai v'tachsayin demai, and therefore, even though it's not ra'oi right now, because it can be ra'oi for you on Shabbat, if you needed it, therefore you're allowed to carry it out. I think we're going to stop
talk about tircha here.
Tircha of what?
Of taking the demai or taking the master and truma.
Right, so that's the first part of the mission, right? So you're limited to a certain amount. You can only do it, a limited amount. It's machloket, of course, whether it's 5 or unlimited. But you can only do it, as our Mishnah made it sound, if it's done for the purpose of a mitzvah or a good act, right? So you can't, that's where we started. You can't just clear out things because you want to, because you want to make space. You have to clear out it if it's for orchim or bitul beit midrash, but you can only do it for that purpose.
But the demai and what we're talking about now, is it still, we're still talking about tircha, or is it a different topic?
So it's a combination, right? So tircha is the first part. This is muksa. This is question, is it usable? Right, because you can't clear out things. Even if you have a car in your garage and you need the garage, assuming your car's muksa, you can't push the car out of the garage, right? It has to be something that's potentially usable. So the question is demai usable? And that's what the answer we give.
So it's more
times. Demai is potentially usable if you're mafkir everything you have. Okay. We'll stop here because the next one actually goes to Amud Aleph, and God willing, tomorrow morning at 7:30, please return to learn with us. Shavua tov.
Thank you. Shikolach.
Yeah.
And thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.